The sheriff deputy looked at me like I was some kind of criminal. Behind him, Patricia stood with her arms crossed, that smug smile plastered across her face as she watched them load my fishing gear into evidence bags. My own fishing gear, from my own property. "Sir, you need to understand," the deputy said, his hand resting on his belt. "These folks have documentation showing this is community property." I stared at the woman who had just destroyed my peaceful morning. She held up her clipboard like it was some kind of weapon, her eyes gleaming with victory. Around us, other HOA board members nodded in agreement, forming a wall of authority that felt suffocating. But what Patricia did not know was that I had just spent 3 hours at the county courthouse that morning. What she did not realize was that her entire development was built on a lie. That is when I knew. They had no idea they were the ones trespassing on my land. The keys felt heavy in my hand as I stood outside the old ranch house for the first time as its owner. 40 acres of rolling hills stretched out before me, ending at the crystal-clear lake that had been my grandfather's pride and joy. After 3 months of paperwork, legal battles with distant relatives, and endless corporate meetings that left me feeling drained, I finally held the deed to paradise. The morning air was crisp and clean, nothing like the smoggy city atmosphere I had been breathing for years. I walked down the familiar dirt path toward the water, my fishing rod bouncing against my shoulder with each step. Every footfall brought back memories of summer visits when I was 10 years old, following Grandpa down this same path before sunrise. The lake stretched out like a mirror, reflecting the orange and pink clouds of dawn. Not a single house was visible from the shoreline, just rolling hills, old oak trees, and the kind of silence that makes you remember what peace actually feels like. I set up my gear on the weathered dock that Grandpa had built with his own hands 30 years ago. The first cast felt like a prayer. The line sailed out over the dark water, and for the first time in months, my shoulders actually relaxed. This was exactly what I needed. No emails, no phone calls, no meetings about quarterly projections. Just me, the water, and whatever fish were brave enough to take my bait. By 9 in the morning, I had already caught 2 decent bass and felt more like myself than I had since before the divorce. I grilled one of the fish right there on the old camping stove, eating breakfast while planning how I would restore the cabin. Maybe add a screened porch. Definitely fix the roof before winter. That was when I noticed the SUVs on the hill overlooking my property. 3 black vehicles parked in a line, windows tinted, just sitting there like they were watching something. I figured they were just folks passing through, maybe hunters scouting the area. This was rural country after all. I spent the entire day by that lake, catching fish, eating lunch under the old willow tree, and feeling genuinely happy for the first time since Grandpa's funeral. The sun was starting to set when I finally packed up my gear, already planning my next trip out here. Maybe I would take a whole week off and really get started on the cabin renovations. The SUVs were gone when I looked back up the hill. I smiled to myself, thinking how perfect this place was going to be. My own private sanctuary, where nobody could bother me with their problems or their demands. Just 40 acres of pure freedom, exactly like Grandpa always said it should be. I was back at the lake 3 days later, coffee in one hand and fishing rod in the other, when the convoy arrived. 3 SUVs came bouncing down the dirt road that led to my property line, kicking up dust clouds behind them. I watched them park in a neat row, and several people in business attire climbed out. They moved with purpose, like a military unit on a mission. The woman leading the group carried a clipboard and wore the kind of power suit that screamed authority. Behind her, 4 other people followed in formation, all of them scanning my property like they were conducting some kind of inspection. My stomach dropped as they marched directly toward my lake. This was private property. My property. The deed was sitting in my truck, along with the survey maps and all the inheritance paperwork. But something about their confident stride made my blood run cold. "Excuse me," the woman called out as she approached the dock. "What exactly do you think you are doing here?" I set down my coffee and turned to face her. She was probably in her 50s, with perfectly styled blonde hair and the kind of stern expression I remembered from middle school principals. Her clipboard was thick with official-looking documents. "I am fishing on my property," I said, keeping my voice calm and friendly. "Beautiful morning for it." She looked at me like I had just told her the earth was flat. "Your property, sir, this is community water belonging to Pine Ridge Estates. You are trespassing on HOA property." The words hit me like a physical blow. I blinked hard, certain I had misheard her. "I am sorry, what did you say?" "I am Patricia Williams, president of the Pine Ridge Estates Homeowners Association. This lake and surrounding area fall under our community water rights. You are going to need to pack up your gear and leave immediately." More people were climbing out of the SUVs now. I counted 6 adults total, all of them walking toward me with the same confident authority. They spread out in a semicircle around the dock, like they were surrounding a criminal. "There has been some kind of mistake," I said, pulling the folded deed from my back pocket. "This is my grandfather's property. I inherited it 3 months ago. Here is the legal documentation." Patricia barely glanced at the papers before dismissing them with a wave of her hand. "Sir, I do not know where you got those fake documents, but I can assure you that this water belongs to our community. We have been managing these water rights for over 5 years." "Fake documents," the words came out louder than I intended. "This is a county deed. These are official property surveys." "Anyone can print fake papers these days," Patricia said, her voice dripping with condescension. "What you are doing right now is called trespassing, and if you do not remove yourself from our property within the next 30 minutes, we will be forced to call law enforcement." The other HOA members nodded in agreement, their faces showing the same mixture of authority and disgust. One of them, a tall man with a gray beard, stepped closer to examine my fishing gear like it was evidence of a crime. "Look, Patricia," I said, trying to keep things reasonable. "I understand there might be some confusion here, but I can prove this land belongs to me. The property markers are right there along the tree line. The survey clearly shows." "30 minutes," Patricia interrupted, tapping her watch. "After that, we call the sheriff." My hands were shaking now, partly from anger and partly from disbelief. I had been looking forward to this peaceful morning for days, and now I was being treated like some kind of criminal by people who had no right to even be on my land. But there were 6 of them and 1 of me, and Patricia was already pulling out her phone with the confidence of someone who had done this before. I looked around at their faces, searching for any sign of doubt or uncertainty, but found nothing except absolute conviction that they were in the right. Patricia held her phone high in the air, speaking loud enough for me to hear every word. "Yes, Sheriff's Department. I need to report an aggressive trespasser on community property. He has fake documents and is refusing to leave our lake area." Aggressive. I had been nothing but polite and reasonable, but I could see exactly what she was doing. She was controlling the narrative before the police even arrived, painting me as the problem and herself as the victim. 20 minutes later, 2 sheriff's deputies pulled up in their patrol car. Patricia immediately walked over to them, her clipboard ready, speaking in hushed tones while pointing back at me. I could see her shaking her head and gesturing dramatically, like she was describing some kind of dangerous situation. The first deputy was older, probably in his 50s, with gray hair and tired eyes. The second was younger, maybe early 30s, and he kept his hand near his radio as they approached. Both of them looked at me with the kind of suspicion usually reserved for actual criminals. "Sir, we need to see some identification," the older deputy said. "We have reports of trespassing on private community property." I pulled out my driver's license and handed it over, along with the deed and survey documents. "Officer, this is my property. I inherited it from my grandfather 3 months ago. All the paperwork is right here." But before the deputy could even look at the documents, Patricia was there beside him, interrupting. "Those are fake papers, officer. Anyone can print anything these days. We have been managing this community water for years." "Ma'am, please step back and let me handle this," the deputy said, but his tone was more polite with her than it had been with me. He glanced through my paperwork quickly, not really studying it. "Sir, these folks seem pretty certain about their property rights here." "Because they are wrong," I said, fighting to keep my voice calm. "Look at the survey. Look at the property markers. This land has been in my family for 40 years. The younger deputy was already looking uncomfortable. "Look, sir, we can sort this all out, but right now we have conflicting claims about property ownership. The easiest thing would be for you to voluntarily leave while we investigate." Patricia smiled triumphantly. "That sounds very reasonable, officer." Voluntarily leave my own property. I could feel my face getting hot. "While you investigate what exactly? I have legal documentation right in your hands." "Sir, please lower your voice," the older deputy said. "We are trying to handle this peacefully." I looked around at the circle of faces staring at me. 6 HOA members and 2 sheriff's deputies, all of them treating me like I was the problem. Patricia stood there with her arms crossed, that same smug expression on her face, watching me get bullied off my own land by people who had no legal right to be there. "Fine," I said, starting to pack up my fishing gear. "But I want everyone's names and badge numbers written down. This is not over." "Is that a threat, sir?" the younger deputy asked, his hand moving toward his radio again. "It is a promise that I will be back with better documentation," I said, pulling out my phone to take pictures of everyone present. "And I will be taking photos of all the license plates." Patricia actually laughed. "Good luck with that. People who think they can do whatever they want always learn the hard way." I loaded my gear into the truck while 8 people watched me like I was some kind of dangerous criminal. My hands were shaking with anger and humiliation, but I forced myself to stay calm. Getting arrested would not help anything right now. As I drove away, I could see Patricia in my rearview mirror, still talking to the deputies, probably making sure they understood just how dangerous and unreasonable I was. But she had made one critical mistake. She had no idea how determined I could be when someone tried to steal something that belonged to my family. I drove straight to the county courthouse, my anger fueling every mile. The clerk at the records office was a kind woman named Betty who had probably been working there since before I was born. She took one look at my deed and nodded. "Oh yes, the Henderson Ranch. Beautiful property. Your grandfather was a good man. He used to come in here every few years to update his will." She pulled out a thick folder and spread the official property maps across the counter. 40 acres, including the natural lake and all water rights. Clear title going back to 1978. "So this is definitely legitimate?" I asked, pointing to my deed. Betty looked at me like I had asked if water was wet. Son, this is as legitimate as property ownership gets. County seal, judge's signature, recorded in the official books. Nobody can dispute this. I showed her the photos I had taken of Patricia and her HOA crew. These people claim the lake belongs to their community, Pine Ridge Estates. Betty frowned and pulled out another map. Pine Ridge Estates is way over here, she said, pointing to an area at least 2 miles from my property. They have a small community pond, but they have never had any claim to your grandfather's lake. My heart started pounding, so they are completely wrong. More than wrong, Betty said, adjusting her glasses. According to these records, someone from Pine Ridge Estates filed a boundary expansion request 6 months ago, trying to claim water rights to your lake. But it was denied because the property already has a clear owner. I stared at the documents she was showing me. Patricia had not just made an honest mistake. She had deliberately tried to steal my property through official channels, and when that failed, she decided to try intimidation instead. Can I get copies of all this? I asked. Absolutely. And son, you might want to talk to a property lawyer. What these people are doing sounds like harassment at minimum. I left the courthouse with a thick folder of documents and a growing sense of outrage. My next stop was Miller and Associates, a law firm that specialized in property disputes. The attorney, David Miller, was a thin man in his 40s who had seen every kind of land grab scheme imaginable. This is interesting, he said, studying my paperwork. The HOA president actually tried to file false claims with the county, attempting to expand their boundaries to include waterfront property that was never part of their development. Is that legal? Absolutely not. Filing false property claims is a serious offense, but what really concerns me is the pattern of behavior you are describing. Organized harassment, false police reports, intimidation tactics. He leaned back in his chair. I think we need to gather more evidence. That evening, I drove to the neighbor whose property bordered mine on the north side. Jim Carson was a retired teacher who had lived there for 20 years. When I explained what had happened, his face darkened with anger. Those HOA people have been using your land for months, he said. I have been wondering who gave them permission. They have been driving through here every weekend, sometimes having parties down by the lake. I even saw them organizing some kind of fishing tournament last month. They have been trespassing on my property. Every weekend since spring started. I have it all on my security cameras if you want to see. We spent the next hour reviewing footage that showed HOA vehicles regularly accessing my property when I was not there. Patricia herself appeared in several videos, directing people around my lake like she owned the place. In one particularly infuriating clip, I watched her giving a tour to potential new residents, describing their beautiful community lake. This is perfect evidence, I said, copying the files to my laptop. There is more, Jim said. They have been telling people in town that they are expanding the development to include the whole valley, making it sound official like it was already approved. I called David Miller that night and described what I had found. He was quiet for a long moment before responding. This is not just harassment anymore. This is conspiracy to commit fraud, filing false police reports, and organized trespassing. We have enough evidence to file both criminal and civil complaints. What do you recommend? Go back to your property and fish like you normally would. Document everything. Let them make the same mistakes again, but this time we will be ready for them. I smiled for the first time since the morning's confrontation. Patricia thought she had won. She had no idea that her victory lap was about to become her downfall. David Miller's advice was simple. Return to your property and act normally. Document everything. Let them hang themselves with their own behavior. So that is exactly what I did. I set up 3 hidden cameras around the lake area, positioned to capture anyone who approached from any direction. I also wore a small recording device, just in case the conversation got heated again. Everything would be documented this time. I arrived at sunrise on Saturday morning just like I had the week before. The lake was peaceful and beautiful, with morning mist rising off the water. I set up my gear on the dock and started fishing, but this time I was not relaxed. I was waiting. Sure enough, the convoy arrived at exactly 9:30, but this time there were more vehicles. I counted 5 SUVs and what looked like a private security van. Patricia had brought reinforcements. The group that approached the dock was twice as large as before. Patricia led the way, flanked by the same HOA board members, but now they had added what appeared to be a private security guard and several other people I did not recognize. "I thought we made ourselves clear last week," Patricia called out as she marched down to the water. "You are trespassing on community property." I continued fishing, not even looking up. "Good morning, Patricia. Beautiful day for fishing." "Do not get smart with me," she snapped. "I called the sheriff again. They are on their way to arrest you for criminal trespassing." "That is interesting," I said, finally reeling in my line, "because I called my attorney and he is also on his way." For the first time, Patricia looked uncertain, but she quickly recovered, waving her clipboard in the air. "An attorney cannot change the fact that you are breaking the law." The security guard stepped closer to the dock. He was a large man with arms covered in tattoos, clearly hired to intimidate. "Sir, you need to leave this property immediately." "Actually, you need to leave my property immediately," I said, standing up to face them. "All of you are trespassing, and I have the documentation to prove it." Patricia laughed, but it sounded forced. "The same fake documents from last week, please." "Not fake documents, Patricia. Official county records, court-certified surveys, and something else you might find interesting." I pulled out my phone and showed her a photo from Jim's security footage. "Video evidence of you and your people using my property without permission for the past 6 months." The color drained from Patricia's face. Several of the HOA board members started whispering among themselves, suddenly looking much less confident. "That is private property you are talking about," one of them said. "You cannot film people without permission." "Actually, I can film anyone who trespasses on my land," I replied. "And apparently, I have been doing it for months without even knowing it." The sheriff's deputies arrived just as Patricia was starting to argue about the legality of the footage. But this time, I was ready for them. The same 2 officers from the week before approached the group, looking tired and annoyed. "Same problem as last week?" the older deputy asked. "Not exactly the same problem," I said, pulling out a thick folder of documents. "This time I have official county records, property surveys, and legal representation." Right on cue, David Miller's car pulled up the dirt road. He stepped out wearing a sharp suit and carrying a briefcase that looked like it meant business. Patricia's security guard suddenly seemed much less intimidating. "Good morning, officers," David said, approaching the group. "I am David Miller, representing the property owner. I have some documentation that should clear up any confusion about who belongs here and who does not." Patricia tried to interrupt, but David held up his hand. "Ma'am, I think you will want to hear this before you say anything else that might make your legal situation worse." The expression on Patricia's face told me she was starting to realize that this was not going to go the way she had planned. The other HOA members were backing away from her, literally putting distance between themselves and their fearless leader. David spread the official property maps across the hood of his car. "Officers, this property has been legally owned by the Henderson family for over 40 years. The deed is clear, the surveys are accurate, and the county records are indisputable." The younger deputy studied the documents carefully. "These look pretty official to me." "Now," David continued, "I would like to know what legal authority these people claim to have for ordering the property owner off his own land." David Miller spread the documents across the hood of his car like he was dealing cards in a high-stakes poker game. The official county seal glinted in the morning sunlight, and suddenly Patricia's clipboard looked like what it really was, a prop in a con game. "Officers, I need to see the HOA's legal documentation claiming water rights to this property," David said, in the kind of voice that made it clear this was not a request. Patricia clutched her clipboard closer to her chest. "We have managed this community water for years. Everyone knows." "I need to see legal documentation," David repeated. "Deeds, surveys, court orders, anything that would give you authority over this private property." The silence stretched out uncomfortably. Patricia looked around at her HOA board members, but they were all staring at the ground or studying their phones. Nobody wanted to make eye contact with her anymore. "Well," the older deputy prompted, "Ma'am, do you have any legal claim to this property?" "This is all just a misunderstanding," Patricia said, her voice much smaller than before. "We were acting in good faith, trying to protect community resources." "Good faith," I laughed, pulling out my phone. "Is that what you call 6 months of illegal trespassing?" I showed the deputies the security footage from Jim's cameras. Video after video of HOA vehicles using my property, Patricia giving tour, people having parties by my lake. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. The younger deputy whistled low. "Ma'am, this looks pretty clearly like organized trespassing." "We did not know," Patricia said, but her voice was shaking now. "We thought the boundaries were different." David pulled out another document. "Except you did know, Patricia. 6 months ago, you filed a request with the county to expand your HOA boundaries to include this waterfront property. The request was denied because the land already had a clear legal owner." The security guard Patricia had brought was backing away from the group, clearly wanting no part of whatever legal trouble was about to unfold. Several of the HOA board members were whispering among themselves, and I caught fragments of conversations about not knowing the full situation and being misled about the facts. "Furthermore," David continued, "filing false police reports is a criminal offense. Claiming that legal property documents are fake is defamation, and organizing systematic trespassing could constitute conspiracy charges." Patricia was looking around desperately now, searching for support from her board members, but they were abandoning her faster than rats leaving a sinking ship. "Now wait just a minute," she said, trying to recover some authority. "We were just trying to protect the community. If there was confusion about boundaries—" "There was no confusion," David said firmly. "You knew exactly what you were doing. You attempted to steal private property through legal channels, and when that failed, you decided to try intimidation and harassment instead." The older deputy was studying the documents more carefully now. "Ma'am, these property records are crystal clear. This gentleman owns this land, and you folks are the ones who are trespassing. But we have invested so much time and effort into managing this area," Patricia protested weakly. Managing someone else's property without permission, I said. That is called theft of services, and I will be billing you for every hour. One of the HOA board members, a woman with short gray hair, stepped forward. Patricia, you told us this was all official. You said the county had approved the boundary expansion. I said we were working on it, Patricia replied, but everyone could hear the desperation in her voice. You said it was already done, another board member accused. You showed us papers. David smiled grimly. I would very much like to see those papers. Patricia clutched her clipboard even tighter, but it was clear the game was over. Her own board members were turning against her. The deputies were asking for documentation she could not provide, and the evidence of months of illegal activity was sitting right there on my phone. Officers, David said, I think we need to discuss what charges might be appropriate here. Criminal trespassing, filing false police reports, conspiracy to commit fraud. And that is just for starters. Patricia's face had gone completely white. The woman who had been so confident and authoritative just minutes before now looked like she wanted to disappear into the ground. This is not over, she said weakly, but everyone knew it was. 3 weeks later, I was back at my lake, fishing in perfect peace. The morning was crisp and quiet, exactly the way I had always imagined it would be when I inherited this place. But now the silence felt earned, protected by legal precedent and clear documentation. Patricia Williams faced 3 criminal charges: filing false police reports, criminal trespassing, and conspiracy to commit fraud. The district attorney had been very interested in her pattern of behavior, especially after 2 other property owners came forward with similar stories of HOA harassment and attempted land grabs. The civil lawsuit was even more satisfying. David Miller had calculated 6 months of unauthorized land use, including the fishing tournaments, parties, and guided tour Patricia had been conducting on my property. The HOA was ordered to pay $15,000 in restitution, plus my legal fees. But the best part was watching the Pine Ridge Estates board meeting where Patricia was forced to resign in disgrace. Jim Carson had recorded it on his phone and showed it to me later. Patricia had tried to claim she was being made a scapegoat, but nobody was buying it anymore. The new HOA president issued a formal written apology and promised that no Pine Ridge Estates members would ever set foot on my property again. I installed proper no trespassing signs along all the boundary lines, just to make things crystal clear. I also added security cameras, though I suspected I would never need them. Word had gotten around the community about what happened to people who tried to mess with the Henderson Ranch. The county updated their official records to include detailed notes about the property boundaries, preventing any future confusion or fraudulent claims. David Miller made sure the documentation was bulletproof, with multiple copies filed in different offices. But more importantly, I finally had the peace I had been looking for. The cabin renovation was going perfectly, and I had started taking vacation days just to come out here and work on it. The screened porch was finished, the roof was repaired, and the old dock had been reinforced with new lumber. Sometimes I would sit on that dock in the evening, fishing for bass and thinking about my grandfather. He would have handled Patricia differently than I did. Probably would have run her off with a shotgun and 2 barrels worth of rock salt. But I thought he would have been proud of the way I fought for the land he loved, using lawyers and legal documents instead of buckshot. The story became something of a local legend. People in town still talk about the HOA president who tried to steal a man's lake and ended up losing her job instead. It serves as a reminder that bullies sometimes pick the wrong target, and that standing up for your rights is worth the effort it takes. Every morning when I cast my first line into that crystal clear water, I remember the lesson Patricia taught me without meaning to. Know your property lines, keep your documents handy, and never let anyone intimidate you off land that belongs to your family. The lake is mine just like it always was, just like it always will be.